Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning. Welcome to Everything Co-op. You know, this month we've been celebrating Black History Month, and the theme is African Americans and the Arts. So to talk about that with me this morning is Lauren Ruffin, who's the Director of the Arts Program at Michigan Central. Good morning, Lauren.
Hey, Vernon. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you today?
I'm good. I'm excited to continue our conversation.
Thank you. I'm excited that you're here and looking forward to this conversation on how much I can learn. So let's talk about you. Where are you? Where did you grow up? Where are you from?
I grew up on the East Coast mostly. I was born in Baltimore. Grew up mostly all over New Jersey. And then the place I know best is your spot, D.C. So after I went to law school, sort of ended up in D.C. for about 15, 16 years. And, you know, that's the grow-up story.
Uh-oh. Okay. Okay. And you went to law school where? Or what? Tell me about your schooling, your education.
I went to VHU, the Howard University, our Bison, for law school. And then for undergrad, I went to school in Western Mass. I went to a little college called Mount Holyoke College, which was a great experience. And I learned a lot up there in that part of the world.
What did you major in?
Political science.
Political science.
And that sort of was what brought me to DC and to law school. And I don't know, I think we're all pretty political. So it made sense for me to sort of understand a little bit more about our human condition by studying it for 4 years.
Okay. So where did you learn about co-ops? Did you learn about co-ops at all in your formal education?
No. I mean, I think my first interaction with co-ops was when I was in college in Western Mass. There's a bit of a sort of hippie solidarity movement up there around, you know, farmers co-ops. It was my first introduction to sort of community-supported agriculture. So I knew a lot about food co-ops and actually spent some time, you know, volunteering on a farm. But other than that, I hadn't thought about it much for a really long time. And when I started the company that I ultimately founded in 2017, I was at the same time reading a book about Marcus Garvey and was starting to think about business models that would expand Black ownership, and, you know, started doing some light reading about co-ops. And, you know, around the same time was fortunate enough to be introduced to one of the best cooperative attorneys in the country, Jason Weiner, who I think you know. Out
of Colorado, huh?
Yeah, he's in I think Boulder. But it's hard to learn about co-ops, and I remember at the time being a little bit like reflecting on my time in law school and thinking about if Howard's not teaching cooperative law at that time, and I don't know if they are now. This was, you know, almost 20 years ago. Like if Black folks aren't talking about this particular business model and how it can help us and how we've always used co-ops, then I assume no one's learning it in law school, which makes it really hard for us to think it's a viable option for us in terms of starting a business.
So I want to add to that real quick. I got my MBA from Stanford, and I taught at Howard. Neither place offers classes in co-ops, and I've gone back to try to talk to them about offering classes. Don't want to hear it. So it's not just the law school. It's the business schools are not teaching it either. We're not getting it, which is a whole nother conversation of why not. But
yeah.
So Jason is out of Colorado, Jason Weiner. He's been on the show.
Okay, cool.
He really knows the co-op world, and Colorado has some great laws around co-ops. So you said you started a company in 2017. What was that?
Started a cooperative called Crux. And initially we started it as a public benefit corporation.
A B Corp.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Well, a public benefit corporation, which is the B Corp is a certification and the public benefit corporation is the entity itself.
I'm talking to a lawyer. I'm talking to a lawyer.
Yeah, we never got B Corp certified. I don't want the B Corp people to come after me. And then we formed a second entity that was a limited co-op association, and it was incorporated in Colorado because of those laws. They make sense for people who want to sort of move into shared ownership or broad-based ownership.
Okay.
Oh, and I guess I should say what Crux is. That was the question you asked me.
Go ahead.
I'm going to catch up. It's early. I've only had one cup of coffee. So the goal with Crux was really to work with Black digital creators and who are working in XR. And XR is sort of the umbrella term for virtual reality and augmented reality. I was doing some work. I was leading an organization called Fractured Atlas, which had a bunch of sponsored projects, art projects, and they were Sundance and Tribeca, sort of these big film festivals. And the film festivals were just starting to show immersive storytelling work, virtual reality storytelling. And I'm at Tribeca, and there's a group of brown women who had this fantastic piece, Vernon. It was it's called Neurospeculative Afrofeminism.
What?
Right?
Okay.
Neurospeculative Afrofeminism. And for those of us who have, and this is the importance of representation. In 2017, when you put on a VR headset, you would have these bright white hands. And it seems like a small thing, but as someone who has brown hands, when you put on a headset and you all of a sudden see white hands, it's really strange. So Neurospeculative Afrofeminism was a fantastic piece. It was, to many people's knowledge, the first piece which actually took the importance of having a digital representation of yourself into consideration. It was a piece that was made for Black people, Black women in particular, and it's this futuristic beauty salon. And it's beautiful. So you're sort of in the salon, you have someone who's doing your hair, it's super funky and cool, and you fly through outer space and you meet this goddess and she talks to you. So I see this piece. It was the best piece I saw at Tribeca, and then I'm talking to the creators because Fractured Atlas was supporting their work. And they tell us that it was 5 brown women, and they only raised $75,000 for the project. And they were right next door to this other project that I knew raised like close to $500,000. Mm-hmm. It was done by a bunch of white guys. And, it was essentially like, what would it be like to be a rutabaga?
No.
It wasn't a really imaginative piece. It wasn't super creative. And so I got really angry about it. And I started being like, this is like an industry that doesn't exist yet. And we already have inequalities. So I started Crux as a community. And we really were a community of Black people just to advocate for each other, to make sure that we were talking about the importance of Black ownership as we go into new technologies. And we grew pretty quickly and got a fair amount of support. Eventually we converted into a co-op.
So, Lauren, I want to go all the way back to what do you do when you do virtual reality and augmented reality? Is this where you have these things that you put on your head, glasses? Yeah. So virtual reality, you have the big headset on. And so you're inside the story. So it looks like a snorkel or the face mask for, okay.
Yeah. You got it, Vernon. You know what we talk about.
All right. I've never owned one of those. Maybe one day I'll go get one. But then they created a story about a futuristic hair salon. These 5 women. Yep. And when they put their hands on the face mask, they showed up white.
Yeah. Well, when you're playing a video game, if it's first person, you can see your hands even if you're in the headset. But when you're moving around and maybe you're touching objects, and most experiences at that time, you would just have these bright white hands, and not even like pink hands. They were just like white. And this was one of the first one, if not the first, that actually took into consideration that maybe we should care enough about the people who are having the experience to make sure that they have a connection to how their appendages are moving around the screen.
Their own hands.
Their own hands.
All right. So that was Crux, and it eventually became a co-op.
Yeah. So we spent some time really thinking about, how we could ensure that it wasn't just, one or two people, founders, making the profit. And as a result, sort of ended up thinking a lot about co-ops, and then, our relationship with Jason made it possible. The goal with the co-op was to build a platform where folks could download the stories that Black people were making in virtual reality and augmented reality, and then the workers would get a fairer share of the price that people would pay for it. That was the initial goal. So sort of an iTunes, but for Black VR creators. And we started doing that. We started talking to more and more creators. We started aggregating content, and then the pandemic hit.
Okay.
And we realized we had a different business model, which was I had all of these friends and people I knew who had been working at Disney or in these sort of big places. And Black folks were the first people to get laid off during the pandemic.
No.
No. And Black creators too. I know it's hard to imagine that we'd be the first to go. Hard to imagine that America's original commodities would be the first people they decide to kick out of their companies, right? So when the pandemic happened, we realized that we had a lot of talented digital creators who were Black and had these incredible skills. They needed to feed their families, so we pivoted and started doing virtual events. And we did close to $2 million in business in 18 months doing virtual events. We did conferences, we did, small meditation gatherings, we did film festivals people were doing online. So we grew pretty quickly, and we paid people a really nice wage, which, ultimately was our downfall. We paid people $125 an hour. But my attitude was, if the best thing that this company does is pay Black people during a pandemic, then so be it. And that's what we did. That's how we survived the pandemic.
So just help me. I like meditation. How would you have a virtual reality meditation meeting, conference, something? How would you do that?
Yeah. So we didn't do we did do some virtual reality events, but a lot of the events we did were on platforms that weren't Zoom. So a lot of people were going to Zoom gatherings. We were doing sort of higher end, just better. There's a lot more connectedness. But in virtual reality, there's this concept called co-presence, which is, it's the ability, because of the technology and how the sound works, for you to really feel like when you're in a headset that you are in the presence of another person. And we spent a lot of time talking about like the experience of being in like a Broadway theater or a movie theater, sort of watching something, having a shared experience, and it's the sound of the person on your left chuckling. Like you can do that in a headset. And when you have a really good experience in a headset, it's maybe 90% of what you have in real life. So we did build some of those experiences, but a lot of what we did was just on really high quality video platforms. And it was really cool. And we would build out these environments, and it would be like you'd be meeting people or doing a festival inside a video game on your computer. It was a lot of fun. Wow.
All right, you're making me want to go out and buy a headset. You just got to tell me which one and what I need to be looking for.
And I got a whole bunch of them, so I'll ship one to you.
So, are you in Detroit now? Is that home?
Yeah, just moved here a couple months ago, and I really like it. It feels like home already.
Why?
There's before we hopped on, we were talking about sort of what DC used to be. When you would walk around and see just so many manifestations of Blackness and Black culture and Black community. Mm-hmm. And Detroit has that. It's still a majority Black city. Overwhelmingly. Detroit and I think Memphis are fighting it out for whether we want to go by sheer numbers or percentages. Okay. But it feels really good. There's culture here. There's music here. The food is amazing. People are kind. I do. I really like it. And I think people probably have an image of Detroit that's outdated. It's definitely a city where Detroiters have fought for this city to maintain the city, even when I think the rest of the country sort of counted them out. And it's good that now we're getting more resources and more attention back into local communities here, the folks who haven't left.
Well, you're making me want to come back and visit Detroit too then. Okay. So you're in Detroit now. Let's talk about the new job. You said 3 months. What are you doing now?
Yeah, so I'm working on a project now. Detroit's train station was abandoned. I'll use the word abandoned in a specific way, meaning it wasn't formally programmed, but there was a lot of stuff happening in there. About 35 years ago. In 2018, Ford Motor Company purchased the building and underwent a $5 billion restoration of the building, as well as some adjacent properties. And it's now an innovation campus, and it's a campus where we've got some companies focused on climate change, climate justice, sort of energy efficiency, a lot around mobility. So your aerospace companies, your car companies, you've got electric bike companies. And so this campus is sort of a dual purpose space, both for innovation, but also for the community. And so my role there is to lead the art strategy for the campus. And I have a co-director who's fantastic, who does a lot of the sort of large public art and a lot of the curation of what we're going to be doing. But it's really exciting. The train station, the date was just announced last week. It'll be opening on June 6th. Should be a pretty big event. And I mean, but it is. It's. I can't stress the quality of the restoration. It's a beautiful building. If we did nothing in there, it would still be breathtaking. But we're going to do some really cool stuff.
Okay, so did you say $5 million or $5 billion restoration?
With a B so far, yeah.
And they've been
it is a restoration. So when you look up in the train station was the prototype for Grand Central. So you walk in and you get that feel. It feels a lot like Grand Central, but they have all this intricate woodwork, and Ford had folks take down what hadn't been removed from the building. They 3D scanned it and then made exact replicas to finish the molding around. So there are all these little details that have been done to a really, really high standard architecturally. And it shows. It is a spectacular space. And there's not another venue for culture or for arts or for interaction in the country like this.
So what will a art strategist do? What will you be doing there? 32 acres. $5 billion.
We are in active talks about what we're going to do. But I think we have some ideas around. It's hard to imagine the scale. It's something like 600,000 square feet of office space and of just sort of space. But we're thinking a lot about digital. We're thinking a lot about how do you give people these sort of unexpected moments of wonder. We all walk around with these little supercomputers called iPhones and Android phones in our pockets. How can we create experiences that happen on site with people's phones, but also maybe some things for them to take home that are really memorable experiences? So we're playing around with a lot, but we got some large scale stuff that'll be here on June 6th that people will get to see and play with.
Can you give us any idea of sneak peek of June 6th?
Nope. Because I know this is going to come up in a Google search with my name. Well, might be looking for me, Vernon. So, nope, you're going to have to come out here and take a VIP tour if you want to see it.
Okay, we may do that. June is a good time in Detroit.
Uh-huh.
It's not cold. And how's the weather now?
It's cold right now. It was very warm 2 days ago. It was almost 70 degrees here, and then the temperature dropped 50 degrees yesterday. But we're in that weird part of the season now with climate change where we really are getting 30, 40 degrees swings day to day. So now it's 20-something degrees and sunny. But I think it's going to be 60s over the weekend. What's happening in D.C.? What are y'all doing? What's the weather like there?
Oh, it's sunny out. It's a very nice day here. Very nice day. Yeah. I need to get out and play a little bit. But I put down June 6th, and we'll see. We'll see by talking and get up there to see what you're doing. This is 32 acres innovation campus. Okay. And you're going to be in charge of the arts. So you mentioned Disney. When I got my MBA, I wanted to be in something in entertainment, something in the arts, something that the product was making people feel good, happy. And I was the only person in my class that was looking for that. And there was only one person a year before, and we talked. I only got one interview, and that was with Disney, and there was no call back. So I ended up with Cummins Engine Company in Indiana doing manufacturing, way away from.
I'm a car person. I'm a big-time car person. You worked at Cummins?
Yeah.
That's really dope.
Yep, and I went around the world doing marketing studies for them.
Oh.
And then I spent 5 years in Puerto Rico running their distributorship, and I had a 67 Mustang convertible while I was there.
You still have the car?
No, when about 92, 93, I was in one of those downturns, no cash, no money, had to feed folk. So
first thing to go.
It wasn't the first. It was it was hard letting it go. Very hard.
Yeah. I have an 87 Grand Wagoneer. That's got it's stock and in beautiful condition, but they did a swap for a Tahoe engine. It's got 11,000 miles on that engine, and it goes, man. And I should have sold it. There's 3 or 4 times when I should have sold it, but I can't let it go. But I think Michigan, this is really the Rust Belt. I can't really drive it here like I could when I was in the Southwest, so I think this might be the year that I sell. And my car's name is Vernon.
Okay, good name.
It's on his license plate. I named him Vernon, so there we go. We were meant to be talking about it.
Lauren, why did you start a co-op? I know you said you wanted to have blacks to make more money, but why a co-op?
My background isn't working with artists. My background is, well, I shouldn't say it is now, but, 10 years ago it was not. I was working in D.C. I was at Martha's Table and National Center for Children and Families and, sort of doing all this work, sort of deep end human services work. And then I hopped over the arts and I realized people were talking about artists living in poverty, but never used the word poverty. And they never use the words like, they're like, how are they going to pay rent? And I'm like, housing justice. So I feel like I spent my first year working in the arts doing sort of language translation, sometimes out loud for myself, and also to help people put what they were saying into a different frame. And there's probably a whole different lecture here on the stigma of poverty, and so how we use language to cover it up. But I realized that, we have this idea of artists because they are sort of people with a little extra flair, and they're often proximate to wealth, and they have wealthy patrons and everything else. But artists live in precarious positions. This is one of the few ways that you can labor for 8 hours a day, and the value of your labor is largely subjective. One person will pay you $5,000 for what you did in 8 hours, and someone else will say, I don't want it at all, 0. So I started thinking about that for artists, and black artists always have it worse. And then I spent time around the same time, there were articles about black-led companies not paying their creative workers. So there was a little firestorm online about Ebony taking months to pay its writers, Ebony magazine. And then, BET, I spent time thinking about, we have 2 black billionaires, who have a lot of ideals that lack imagination and most certainly aren't rooted in solidarity or helping other black people. And if BET had been a co-op, we would have hundreds, maybe thousands of black millionaires walking around seeding a black creative economy, which would allow for us to have more artists and more designers and maybe, more people who felt like they had space to try new things and fail in service of a better future. And so I don't know, Vernon, I got angry about it and really started thinking about how can we just have a different model that's maybe rooted in understanding that, like, our ancestors worked for free and built this country, and we probably have a duty to pay each other a fair wage, and maybe even a more than fair wage. Can we create our own reparations model in our communities instead of mimicking whiteness and capitalism? So
the 2 billionaires you're talking about are the Johnsons of BET,
yeah.
Mr. and Mrs.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so they did what most entrepreneurs, and the reason I went and got an MBA was because I was down that track too. I wanted to make a lot of money, bought into the capitalism, and didn't like in the MBA program. All decisions were made it came down to what's the greatest return on investment to the shareholder. Every decision, what's the greatest return on the shareholder, not what's best for the employees, not what's best for the planet, but what's best for the shareholders. Now, we'll be back. We're going to take a break, and then we'll be back to talk about I want to talk more about what you found out with the co-op. Were you able to help people get to spread the wealth? I like the idea of BET. If it was a cooperative, then that would have shared all of those billions of dollars would have been shared by the workers, and that's one of the big things about co-ops that I like a lot. So we'll be back to talk more with you, Lauren. I love your energy too. Love your energy.
Oh, that's good. Not everybody does, so I'm glad you like it, Vernon.
Okay. Well, you named your car after me. What else can I do?
Yeah, exactly. We were meant to be here.
We'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial.
News Talk 1450 WOL-AM, where information is power.
Oaks, and I'm having the pleasure and a lot of fun talking to Lauren Ruffin, who is Director and Lead Strategist of the Arts Program at Michigan Central. Lauren, when we left for the break, we were talking about if BET had been a co-op, and I'm thinking of a worker-owned co-op where everybody that worked in BET, including the janitors, belonged to the co-op. And as they made money, one of the things is normally there's a membership fee you have to pay to get in, and then if there's surplus or profit, then you share in that surplus or profit, and the board of directors will decide on what happens with that surplus. It could be in the bylaws that the members make the decision, but normally it's the board of directors that decide that, and they will decide how much of it stays in the business for growth, how much of it goes out to help the society, and how much goes in terms of dividends or patronage, as they call. But, when you talk about the Johnsons and BET, I'm thinking, what if Oprah Winfrey had created a co-op? Or what about if the Michael Jordan was working in a basketball team that was a co-op? And that you get some kind of way of spreading out the money to the team players and the other people that work there. You have any comments on something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are the questions that we have to start asking as Black people. And I don't know, there's so much data about us. If Black America were a country, we would have something like the 15th highest GDP in the world. We have tremendous buying power. We over-index in sort of being on technology, but we also over-index in being consumers rather than creators. And so when you look at that data and then you take the flip side of that, which is if you sliced up creative people and people who are working, whether that's the dude who's making T-shirts and selling on the corner outside the game, or the woman who, opened a restaurant, we over-index on creativity. And so to me, as you sort of talk about Oprah, who has another, big creative firm, I think we have to sort of start interrogating and asking people questions about, why do we need another billionaire? And do we want to recreate the mistakes of capitalism and colonialism? The other thing I'll say, which is somewhat related, is we talk a lot about shaming millionaires and eat the rich, but we could spend time looking at the laws that make that sort of wealth possible. And maybe it's that after your first 100 million, when you pass away, instead of being able to give it to your heirs, we change laws to have it revert to community property. So I think there are lots of ways that we can really begin to think about the time we're living in. Someone described this time to me as that part halfway through the Monopoly game when it's no longer fun for everyone else because you know who's going to win.
Okay.
Like that's the best way to describe where we are right now, you know? Yeah, it's like the 12-year-old at the end of the table who's gobbled everything up is going to be fine for life, and we're just sitting here paying them rent forever. So I think we have to ask different questions and maybe set different models for ourselves that are really rooted in our ancestry and where we come from. Where community property was the world over, you know, for Indigenous people, for Brown people, we didn't have a concept of ownership, of personal ownership of things. We might need to spend some time trying to get back there.
It would be extremely interesting because the form of capitalism that we have in the U.S. isn't even what Adam Smith envisioned. Because the whole side of helping society and helping human beings, it seemed like that was left out of the model. And when you start talking about the laws, to me, the first thing I would go to is the law that Donald Trump made for taxes, which you just said billionaires and millionaires don't have to pay as much taxes as, particularly in terms of percentages, as the waitress or that person that was during COVID was standing behind the grocery store cash counter, taking your cash and making sure that you had groceries. It said these people are really, really necessary, but we're not going to pay them anything.
Yep. Okay.
And when you start looking at child care for them, they can't afford child care. They can't afford transportation. They can't afford rent. They can't. So how do we reimagine capitalism? Interesting that I went there because the lady that wrote that book, almost got her name, Rebecca, she said on this show, she's a Harvard professor, that she sees reimagining capitalism as cooperatives. And that to me would be interesting. I want to go back to how do we get those laws changed or have more people think through, particularly those that have made it?
Yeah. You know, I think there's something about, and, you know, I also, you know, teach world building and visualizing futures at Arizona State University. So there's also
on the web.
Yeah, I teach online. Also,
Okay.
But in person up until last semester, or this semester. It's my first. Well, that's a longer story. But you know, when you think about how stories are told, good stories, especially ones that are focused on the future, sort of paint a picture of what's going to happen. And so when we talk, like as the story creator, you can't just let your audience make up the ending. Right, because everybody gets to a different place. But like when you think about us telling the story of what happens to America after we defund the police, or what happens to America after capitalism, we don't do a good enough job of telling that story to begin to make people really think that it's possible. And so, to me, part of our challenge with reimagining capitalism is to have people understand that you're going to be okay if you have a little less, because your community is going to support you. Billionaires, your legacy will be fine if that's what you care about. Your family will be fine generationally. Like everything you care about is going to be fine, but the rest of the world will be better. And then we begin to get into the real granular storytelling, the songs, the movies, the books that really make it possible for us to understand and let go of a lot of our preconceived conditions. But I think defund the police is such a good example of where progressive movements fall short, because we didn't do a good job telling people what happens after there are no more police. What happens to the police? What happens to our community? Who do I call? You know, who do I call if I'm scared and someone's in the house? Or who do I call when I have a car accident? You know, like, how do I get off of the street? Mm-hmm. And these seem like pedantic questions, but they're not. You know, it really comes down to the granular, like, how do we have people understand how do we tell them stories and paint a picture where they know they're going to be okay?
That is so interesting. You got me going here with my brain is, okay, what would that really look like? And how could you get that across in different kinds of ways? You said songs, movies, books. and you got this virtual reality of all of these different kinds of ways of presenting the story, but first have to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we spend a lot of time talking and writing, but like this is where I go back to like artists are so essential because you need the visual creativity. I think a lot about the first time when I saw the first Black Panther in the movie theater.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this scene that's really expansive and you see Wakanda.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And I got choked up. It was such a powerful thing because I was like, wow, we could have had this. You know, like
you mean we don't have it? It's not.
No, Vernon, we don't have any sort of futuristic green cities where things aren't, where all the architecture isn't boxy because it's cheaper to make things that way. You know,
I'm still looking to meet one of those folks that come down here, you know, that have all of this power and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's, but that storytelling in that particular moment, for me, made me think about all of the intangible things that we'd lost, the potential around design, around community, around prioritizing green spaces because they're good for our mental health and good for the environment. You know, all of those things. But I think the visual stories and the fiction stories, we kind of have to, I mean, you know, there's a quote, you have to write yourself into the future. You know, I think we have to we got to like tell our story into the future. We have to show ourselves what the future is. And that's why I really do appreciate a lot of the artists that I work with. You know, I just think we need to work with people that make sure they have more support. And cooperatives, you know, cooperatives can provide a level of freedom and like sort of enough breathing room financially for you to really begin to think about, you know, what you want your life to look like and how you want to be in relationship to your community.
So I had heard of an artist cooperative where they were musicians, and you know, the other thing about artists is you may have a gig this weekend, but you may not have one for 2 or 3, 4 more weekends or something.
Yeah.
And they had worked out a schedule where all of the monies went into a pool and all of the artists got a part of that pool. And I really like that idea because some people make it, some don't. Those that don't live hard. And sometimes I can't figure out what causes one artist to make it and another one don't. I mean, when I listen to the ones that don't make it, they sound as good as, if not better than, the one that made it. So it's like, when you say subjective, it's like, it makes absolutely no sense to me.
Yeah.
And so they were looking at this co-op didn't make it, but I liked their concept. I liked their idea.
Yeah, there was a for-profit company. I think its name was like Pando or Panda, but they were doing something similar with athletes. And so, you know, similarly, athletes might get injured. You might, you know, be on your way to the big leagues, and then all of a sudden something happens. But they sort of were targeting college athletes who were likely going to make it to the big leagues, and they would all pay into a pool. And so if one person is wildly successful, you know, Michael Jordan, it doesn't mean that you're, I don't know, Tony Snell comes to mind just because he's been in the news recently, but he's actually had a great career. But we'll just say Tony Snell for an example of another basketball player. But, you know, for those guys who only spend one year in the league, there's some level of insurance that they're going to be able to have extra income. Or the person who gets injured, like, you know, the second game of their professional career. But, you know, that's a for-profit. But it still has, again, like some cooperative underpinnings whereby it behooves all of us to win. That's when we do the best. But if one of us hits it big, then at least the rest of us aren't at zero, which is what capitalism, and especially venture capitalism, requires. You know, they're looking for, they got 100 companies. They want one to go 100, you know, they want one to go 100x or infinite x. And then they want everybody else to fail. That's how they make their money.
Well, I think they would argue with you that they don't want any of them to fail, but the likelihood is most will, and only 1 out of the 100 will succeed, and they want to make sure they got their money invested in that. That one.
But I mean, to your point, there are companies that don't succeed simply because all the resources go to the one that hits it first and starts to skyrocket. It's not because they're not viable companies or good ideas. It's because all of a sudden the investor resources go to where the getting looks good, you know?
So now you come up with the financing of co-ops, the financing of businesses. And I know it may not be a surprise to you or anybody listening, but black women have a hard time getting the funding. So how did you raise money for Crux or Fractal Atlas? And do you have any comments on getting the money, the capital that's needed to start or to finance a business?
Yeah. I mean, I was fortunate with Crux that we had some existing relationships with funders who were interested in exploring a cooperative model, right down to the person who introduced me to Jason that made the cooperative possible is a funder who supported our work. So we were very fortunate. And then from there, we were able to, again, like get into the events business, which, the best money is money that you earn on your own. And so we were able to sort of, with the pandemic, come up with a viable model. I realized that, and I don't want to jump over we were really lucky that we had, a lot of community support from funders that we'd worked with previously, or we had just good relationships.
Well, let me stop you there a second. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You said you were lucky that you had known these people, but did you meet these people like with the work at Martha's Table, or raising money for Martha's Table, so you get into this world of folks that have money and they get to know you and everything, and so it makes it easier for you to go back and talk?
Exactly. So when I started Crux, I'd been a nonprofit and had been a nonprofit fundraiser for a decade, and before that had done sort of appropriations work on the Hill. So I knew how to raise money. It had been part of my career, and I had pre-existing relationships who were, at that particular point in time, really interested in.
So, Lauren, I'm going to say to you that was not luck. Okay.
You're right. It was skill, but I've always thought it's better to be lucky than good, so I like to think it's luck. Mm-hmm. And we also thought a lot about how much did we really need. I think that there are aspects of capitalism that I think might make sense. And one of them is, if you have a good idea and there really is good market fit and you talk about it the right way, your audience will find you. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about what was a responsible ask from our friends. There are people who go out and say, I want to raise $10 million right off the gate for this idea. That felt irresponsible to us. Okay. We said, if we can get this thing off the ground and start to get some traction with, $250,000, then let's start there. Because once you get on that gravy train of sort of money's coming in, then you start to sort of feel like it becomes about you, feeling like you need to do something with this dollar, as opposed to the idea that like maybe these dollars should be allocated someplace else. So we raised closer to $750,000 over the course of our existence. But we quickly got to the point where we were bringing in our own money. The workers, the owners of the co-op were operating at such a high level that we, and I'm really, this is there's a lot of things about Crux that I would do differently. But now that I've reflected, the thing that I think is really cool when I'm in gatherings with folks who do a whole bunch of artist employment programs, et cetera, is Crux is one of the few that asked artists to compete, Black artists, to compete with for-profit companies for bids. When you got to the event business, which is cutthroat, we were winning contracts from very large that people were like, we want to work with you because you do it better. And we had this huge contract with X firm that's been doing this, that was an in-person event company, but they don't know how to do virtual events. So we were bidding for this stuff. We were winning bids as a Black cooperative. And to my knowledge, that's never been done before, which allowed us to raise less money, but also to pay our workers more. Especially once I realized the pandemic ain't ending anytime soon. This is people's only source of income, so we're going to pay them well for their time. And, we'll just do that until we can't do it anymore. And that's what we did.
So how many members did you have in Crux?
We had 17 members. And, all but 2 of them were Black creators. We had one white person and one Filipino person, but majority Black or brown by far. Coders, people who make films for a living, producers. You know, it was a fun group. It was the most fun I probably ever had working. We had a really good time, and folks remained very good friends. A lot of theater makers too. But it was really dope, Vernon. It was really dope.
You just lit up when you were talking about them.
No, they're people I love, and you know, it'll be interesting when people start to tell stories about the pandemic.
Okay.
You know, for the way that communities changed and the way that we thought about interacting with each other, I think shifted in a way that, in a lot of ways that were really cool. I met some cool people that I would never have met except that we could just, you know, hop on video and spend a lot of time together.
So Crux has 17 members. Mm-hmm. Did the members then elect the board of directors? So
we had an existing board. Colorado law specified that. Okay. And because we only really operated as a co-op from the time we started it, maybe 2.5 years until we closed, that board stayed the board. And we were also just drinking from a fire hose the whole time. It was very busy, and I think if I could go back and say the things that we would have spent more time doing, it'd be around governance and education. But no, our board was the board for all of our existence.
So the fifth principle of cooperation is education, training, and information, and that's what at first attracted me to co-ops. Was watching everyday people, mainly black women in D.C., run a business, and that was a housing, limited equity housing co-op. So maybe 50 units, and they elected a board, and they made decisions, and quite intelligent decisions, and sometimes at best a high school degree, but a lot of training. Lots of training to learn how to run a business, learn how to run a meeting, how you can resolve conflict without having to go to the OK Corral, but in a positive kind of way, listening to each other. So that was the first reason I fell in love with this model. And then to find out the reason you did it was you can make money for the people that work there. They can get financial wealth. That was so exciting to me. I think that's the third principle. You put some money in and you can take it out. And it's open to everybody and anybody, which is the first principle. Okay, so Crux, 17 members, $125 an hour. Wow. I mean, it wasn't the best business decision. I thought about when I consult what my discounted nonprofit rate was, and I felt like I should value people I was working with at that level. And everybody I talked to said, this isn't sustainable. And I'm like, you're probably right. We're going to do it for right now. This doesn't have to last forever. But yeah, it was definitely when you sort of throw paint against the wall and see where it sticks, it just sort of was like, what are we going to pay people? That's what it is. It's how I value myself. It's how we'll value everybody else. Okay. Yeah. My business degree and running a business is like, no, that won't work. Let's find another way. Let's make everybody gets $50 an hour and you get to share in the surplus.
But I will say, Vernon, when you put out the idea in like a job announcement on Instagram that you're looking for people to join a co-op and you want the best talent to apply, you want the best black talent to apply, you tell them it's $125 an hour. If I hadn't done that, I would have been competing with other companies that were more established for talent. And that talent allowed us to go after bigger contracts. Wasn't sustainable, but for the 18 months it worked, it was actually kind of a smart business strategy. But again, once you realize that this thing isn't going to last forever, your risk tolerance gets different.
Because I would really like to have it around. It sounds wonderful. It sounds wonderful. In your current position at Michigan Central, do you see any avenues for helping to start artist co-ops?
You know, I think so. I'm really excited and I have a co-director, Kelly Kivland. I think both of us have been in deep relationship with artists for a long time now. I think we're working on, we're doing a lot of thinking around the contract process, how our contracts not extracted around intellectual property and ownership and all those things. the natural evolution of that conversation is probably to think about some sort of shared ownership or resource pooling, right? And I'll be really broad about that. We also have this unique thing of, Ford Motor Company started this thing and has never, there's a nonprofit component here. There's it's a company that knows how to build factory and office spaces, but now it's building community space. So I think there's a lot of interest in new ideas. And then you sort of hit okay, this new idea is a good idea. And then there's the how.
Right.
But I think that Kelly and I are both really interested in, and Detroit has such a vibrant sort of solidarity economy, activist, co-op community already here. We might as well start thinking about building cooperative containers for artists to pool into. And, we have the resources to do that sort of thing and to learn.
What if Motown was a co-op? What if Motown was a co-op?
Right? No, but once you start asking yourself that question about the industries that Black people work in, you can't unsee it. You really can't unsee it.
Wow.
Yeah, what if record labels were co-ops? I mean, when you learn that Aretha passed away with only like $80 million, which I know sounds like a lot, but it isn't. You really start to think about sort of various forms of wage theft that don't feel like wage theft. So it's an interesting time to be asking all these good questions, Vernon.
Okay, so what message would you like to leave people with?
Well, one, anyone who's interested in a co-op should call Jason.
Jason Weiner in Colorado. Yep.
Jason Weiner in Colorado. If you do that, it becomes possible much more quickly and much less expensively than if you call your lawyer down the street who has no co-op experience. So there's that. But there's also this, as people, we should start interrogating and asking ourselves questions about everything. And I think one of those things is, why do we feel like we have to mimic whiteness in our business dealings? Can't we just mimic our ancestors and what they want for us?
And our ancestors did not believe in owning property. They believe in sharing, working together, picking each other up. So I like the ethical values of cooperation, honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. Yeah. Love it.
That's us.
Lauren, I want to thank you so very much for taking time out and joining us, and I look forward to seeing you on June 6th, if not before. Thanks so much. Everybody out there, we'll see you next Thursday, which is Women's History Month. We start. Please live cooperatively.